Welcome back, Camden Catholic. All right, so to dispel any of the misunderstandings about what's going on right now. So some of you that had me in class today actually already have like 50% of this information, right? Some of you, however, were on the retreat. And look at that, it's snowing outside. So the big thing about it is the people that have had me in class today, what you're going to need to do is kind of fast forward through this flip and find out where your information left off and then pick up from there, okay? Now, a lot of this stuff is on the test, so make sure you're paying attention. But this flip shouldn't be crazy long because we're talking about something that happened in only a few years in the Middle Ages, right? We're talking about the plague. So, first and foremost, we left off in class talking about the famine of 1315 to 1317. Some of you are like, my notes stopped right here. All right, well, I'll pick up right there really quick just to give you a heads up. Now, the famine from 1315 to 1317 was yet another thing that kind of caused the plague, leading up to it. And a big part of it actually happens to do with like climate change and things like that. Because by 1300, the Europeans were farming almost every piece of land that they could find, right? Population is spiking, people are growing too fast to actually handle the food that's being yielded out, and then all of nowhere, this thing called a mini ice age happened. This climate change thing happened, right? And it produced tons and tons of rain that led to years of crop failures, right? Now, this famine is going to kill as many as 15% of all of the peasants in some English villages, right? Which is a very big number when we're looking at one country to the other, right? And then one other really big consequence of starvation and poverty is that you become much more susceptible to disease, right? So that's a huge piece of it, all right? Now, so the 1315, 1317 famine is another lead-up cause to the Great Plague of Europe, right? Black Death. Now, the thing about it, though, that is just a simple setting piece, right? So remember, the famine, and then also the overcrowding of the cities, as well as this right here, merchant ships, are going to be the three big reasons to why the plague spread so fast. So make sure in your notes somewhere that you have something that says like merchant ships, the famine, and then also overcrowding of the cities, right? But here's the thing. The plague is going to start in China, actually, originally. And it's going to reach Europe in 1347 via a merchant ship. Now, some of you are like, well, how's the boat carrying the plague? Well, here's the thing. Right after the Crusades had actually kind of finally begun to get wrapped up, Europe begins to emerge from the Dark Ages and start trying to make some more money, right? So they start sending more and more boats out. And around 1347, this gets much bigger, right? Italy is locking down trade within the Mediterranean. They got boats going all over the place. Well, one of these boats carrying the plague hits the island of Sicily, and then it just spread like wildfire, right? Within 3 years, it goes from Italy, and it ends up taking over everywhere in Europe all the way up to the British Isles, right? Even into Norway and places like that. Now, we talked about this in class. Some of you are like, what about this little hole in the map? This doesn't make any sense. All right, well, the thing about it is that's Kievan Rus, and the Kievan Rus, or the Ukrainian, Polish, Lithuanians, were actually able to keep the plague out because they prevented people from coming in. Because here's the thing, if people were making more money and there's more work available, people were going to begin to move around a lot more, right? So the plague was spread very quickly due to this new economic patterns, this famine that had actually weakened their immune system, and also the overcrowding of cities, right? Because here's the thing, basically in the overcrowding of cities thing, let's say hypothetically somebody in my 7th period class got the plague. Let's say Marquise got the plague, right? Well, that means that within a couple of days, just because they're so close together, Frank and Alvarez are going to end up with the plague as well, right? And if Frank's got the plague, then Wobbs is going to get the plague. And then if Wobbs get the plague, everybody's going to get the plague because he's running around class all the time, right? So, but the plague is going to spread very rapidly, right? Now, some of you are like, well, Mr. Terry, why did the plague spread so quickly? Like, what was spreading it? Well, here's the thing. You could actually end up with 2 different types of the plague, right? You could have the bubonic, well, actually, there's 3. But the 2 big ones that we want to talk about are the bubonic and the pneumonic. The septicemic form of the plague is a little bit different. It just means that you're going to die pretty much no matter what you do. Now, 2 types of the plague that we're going to talk about, though. You saw that. I didn't drop that. Now, 2 types of the plague, though, that you actually can talk about more than often than not than any other ones are the bubonic and the pneumonic. And these all have to do with how you actually get these diseases, right? Now, the bubonic form of the plague is actually spread by infected fleas, all right? So fleas are going to bite you, and here's the thing about fleas, right? Fleas actually inside of their saliva and in their regurgitation have a chemical inside of it that acts as an anticoagulant, right? So it prevents the blood in your like capillaries or your blood and this stuff called like matrix cells from actually bonding together to stop bleeding in your body, right? Well, to get that into your system, a flea has to go like clack, bleh, and it has to like throw up inside of your body. Well, that regurgitation actually has the plague bacteria Yersinia pestis inside of it. Remember, Yersinia pestis is the bacteria that causes the plague. Don't forget that, all right? So Yersinia pestis is spreading like wildfire due to these fleas. Well, here's the thing. Where are the fleas coming from? Well, the fleas are coming from all the rats, and the rats are all over the top of these boats that are now moving all over Europe, right? Merchants are the biggest cause of the spread of the plague because they're actually carrying the plague all over the place, right? The occupation that was in charge of spreading it more than anybody else. Well, not in charge of. They didn't do it on purpose. Now, the other big form of the plague is called the pneumonic plague, right? The pneumonic plague is actually what happens when you sneeze or cough when you have the plague, and you actually shoot out tiny, tiny, tiny little droplets. My hair is doing something weird. It's annoying me. Tiny little droplets of blood get expelled out of your face and your mouth and your nose and stuff like that. And these little tiny droplets of blood actually have plague bacteria inside of them. You inhale it, you got the plague now, right? So Wobbs had the plague and he's going, and it's just going out. That's the pneumonic form of the plague, right? Well, really quickly, we're not going to watch that video. You do not write all this down. Do not write all this down. If I see this in a flip, that means I know you muted me. All right, so don't write all this down. But we'll talk really quickly about what happens to your body when you get the plague. So let's say, hypothetically, Wobbs did get the plague, right? Yay. Now, anyway, so the first thing that swells up immediately are these things right here, your lymph nodes, right? They actually run the full perimeter of your jaw, down your shoulders, underneath your armpits, down your sides, and in through your legs, all right? So those swell because they're trying to stop the bacteria from spreading even further. Now, next to this, really quickly, just write this down. Just write this down. It's a good word. B-U-L-B-O-U-S, a bulbous. All right, so a bulbous is actually what happens to one of your lymph nodes when it becomes infected and it gets huge and pus and like really nasty things, and the bacteria begins to grow and it grows like the size of a golf ball. I'll show you a picture of one here in a second. All right, so then you end up getting pneumonia, which is like really rough to have out the gates. When fluid actually builds up on your lungs and you end up having like a very, very serious illness. Pneumonia alone, so you can actually die from step 2 of the plague straight up, all right? Then you end up getting blood poisoning. Now, the blood poisoning is when the bacteria actually gets inside of your actual blood system, leading to that the coughing, the spreading of it pneumonically, right? Then your orifices bleed, which is actually urinary tract, your mouth, your nose, because the orifice is an opening in your body. And then you get, this is huge, right down this one step of the plague. Lenticulation. Lenticulation is actually the forming of black dots of infected blood all over your body, which led to the name, the Black Plague, right? The Black Death. Once you had those forms, you knew pretty much that it was done for, you were going to die, because that means that your cells are becoming necrotic and they're actually decomposing a little bit as well. Now, then you end up with extreme pain, cardiac arrest, stroke, coma, eventual death. Now, did you die out the gate? That's a bulbous right there. Isn't that gross? Now, and that right here, that's the septicemic form of the plague. When you actually become necrotic, when that happens, you're donezo. Now, going into it, though, these are some popular medical cures, right? Write this down, because I'm going to need you to add some to it as well. So first and foremost, these are popular medical cures. Notice I have the word cures in quotation marks. If there are the word cures in quotation marks, that means that it is an assumed truth, and it actually is not going to cure anybody, right? So all of these things were practiced by normal people, did not work. It actually sometimes spread the plague even worse, okay? So doctors, first of all, are going to start wearing real strange costumes, right? And this is actually more towards the later end part of the plague. And we only ever documented this a couple of times in history, but they would wear these big costumes, right, with like these bird masks on the end of them. Now, the bird masks actually were used because they would stuff spices and herbs into the end of it because they believed that the smell actually kind of contributed to the spread of the plague, right? Now, bathing in human urine was a big one. Wearing excrement, which is poop. Now, placing dead animals in your home to try and fend off the plague was a big one. That didn't work. Leeching is a huge one, actually trying to prevent blood clots and leach it out of your system. That didn't work. They do work for other things, though. They actually can help with blood clots. But not the plague. They actually spread it even worse because the leeches also go bleh, and they also end up like injecting it into your body. Drinking molten gold and powdered emeralds was a big one. And then burning incense to get rid of the smell of the dead was another really, really big one as well. Now, write this one down, though, as well. Lancing, L-A-N-C-I-N-G, a bulbous. That means whenever you would have one of those real big infected bulbuses on your neck, they would actually take a scalpel and cut it open, releasing all that pus and guts and black bacteria and stuff. And what it would end up having is sometimes end up giving it to the doctor that did the lancing, right? So now the big effects of the plague, though, is first of all, it's going to undermine some faith in religion. It's going to change the way religious practices happen in Europe. It's going to affect the economy. Next to the economy, write positive. So we'll talk about that later when we get to the Renaissance, but just write positive next to the economy. And then culture is heavily going to be influenced as well. Now, a way to try and describe the way it affected faith is the fact that some people considered it a curse from God, right? Some people began to try and grow new religious sects and things like that, to try and create new groups within their religion, thinking that they could find ways to ward off the plague through prayer. One big one was called the flagellenti. Flagellenti. It's where they would actually do self-inflicted penance. They would actually roam through Europe and hit themselves or hurt themselves, thinking that if like I hurt myself in consideration of the sins that I have done, then maybe I won't get the plague. Yeah, that didn't happen. Some of them ended up getting it anyway, right? And those are flagellants right there, actually, as well. And they would also beat themselves with rods or paddles, they would actually bind their legs sometimes. Really messed up stuff. Medieval art is going to change, because remember, this is in the late Middle Ages, so art's coming back again slowly, real slowly. Art's coming back. Well, some of that art is going to begin to become very obsessed with death, right? The Dance of the Dead is a big theme of art during the late Middle Ages. Skeletons, death, corpses, like the death waiting on you was a very, very big prominent form of the Black Death during this time. And then also, nope, we'll watch that video later. That's what it looked like when they would lance one of your bulbuses. Could you imagine one of those? You ever seen the Dr. Pimple Popper videos? It's like that. It's gross, right? So then right here, how the plague's finally going to end is huge. You need to star and underline this entire section because this is huge, okay? Because here's the thing. If this plague almost wiped out most of Europe, well, we got to be like, well, what the heck? How did it finally end, right? Well, several different reasons. One big one is quarantine, right? Quarantining is when you actually take a person and you isolate them away from infected people, right? So one of the big reasons why it actually created itself in China, but the Chinese were able to stop it and slow it down, is because they were active in the quarantine process. Another big one is moving. People began to move outside of the cities into country areas. Now, this is particularly the wealthy who had country estates that they would actually move to. So moving people to rural areas for a short time away from crowded cities was a big way to fend off the plague. Hygiene. People washed themselves more. Clean air. Actually, one of the popes discovered, they believe that having a fire in your home actually burnt up any of the possible plague bacteria that was inside the air if you were in nearby one. Because he actually apparently sat between two fires, and every time he would anoint the sick, he never got it because he was sitting between those two fires. Now, travel and migration is going to slow down, which helps slow down the progress of the plague a little bit, and also some periods without war. Remember I told you the 100 Years' War actually had a long piece in the middle of it because of the plague, right? It killed all the troops. So then last one, we believe that there is a chance that 25 to 30 million people in Europe, which is almost 50% of their population at the time from 1347 to about 1351, were killed by the plague. Now that means literally a third of the entire world population. Don't write these numbers, just like 1 out of every 3 people in the world probably died from this terrible, terrible disease. Now, last one, but not least, the Black Death also began a dramatic persecution of the Jewish community in Europe, right? They were blamed for spreading the plague, for apparently putting it in the well waters of towns, and then also accused because Jewish communities actually stayed more immune from the plague because they were actually isolated away from other people, and also because they had more practice of hygiene, as well as were from wealthier areas typically, right? So a lot of persecution of the Jewish community is going to go down following the plague. But that's it, all right? So that's the Black Death in Europe, and that's the last bit of stuff that will be on your test on Friday. So I will see you guys then. Have a great evening. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Get ready for that review game.